Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Holy moly, huh? Here we go. My name's Mickey. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Mickey.
Okay, we'll just start the tears here. What a gift to be able to say that, you know? It sounded like the worst news in the world to me. To be an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Mickey. I'm a moral leper. You know, it's like, oh, you know, and now I get to say it, and I get to say it on the safe side of the river. It's Sunday morning, and I agree with Judy. I don't know why in the world I ever got picked for what some people consider to be the spiritual slot. We'll see about that. But somebody handed me a card, and if God will allow me the memory, they handed me this card years ago, and it's a prayer, and I'd like to start our Sunday morning in my talk with a prayer, if it's okay with you. Here's what it said on the card. Good morning, God. You're ushering in another day, untouched and freshly new. So here we come and ask you, God, if you'll renew us too. Forgive the many errors that we made yesterday, and help us once again, dear Lord, to walk closer in your way. But Father, we're well aware we can't make it on our own, so take our hands and hold them tight, for we can't walk alone. Amen. So, I could just say thank you now and sit down, because I hope you enjoyed the 4 versions of this talk that I ran through last night instead of sleeping. I told Marie, I said, you know, if your life flashes before your eyes before you die, I said, I'm going, honey. I mean, the whole movie. It was the whole, I've never had that happen. It was the whole movie. And I'll start the same way I start every talk I give in Alcoholics Anonymous. I came to AA for 2 weeks of sobriety. That's not a joke. I came here so that I could get 2 weeks where I wouldn't be that sick, where I wouldn't hurt like that. And if I could get 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, where I wasn't so terribly ill, I would thank you, and I would go on back out and drink. And not because I was thirsty, but because I'd been drinking since I was 4 years old. And I was 27, and I was tired. It's hard on the machine to be an active drinking alcoholic. And I'd been hospitalized the previous year at 26 years old for a suspected heart attack. It was just hard, you know, it was just hard. And I thought if I could get 2 weeks, then at least I'd get a little healthier, and I could go on back out and take the ass whipping I had waiting for me. And that was, let's see, on the 12th of this month, which I guess is in, I don't know, 6 days, whatever it is. That was 36 years ago. And I want to tell you what that means to me, because I had, and we all have like our whole file card of beliefs. And let me tell you one of my beliefs. The only people who win are special. Astronauts, Rhodes Scholars, president, whatever, that's who wins. But I didn't have any of that. And I thought, man, I have flunked everything, and I'm going to flunk this. There is no way. I got on that train when I was 4 years old, and I knew I had to ride it until I died. And what a surprise. Here's like one of the first pieces of good news that I got from Alcoholics Anonymous. Any garden variety drunk who wants out can get out. Provided we do certain things, and not perfectly. The issue is, are we willing to try to do what it says in the big book with somebody who has tried to do it out of the big book? We get to walk out of there free. Now, I haven't had a drink since I walked in here on February 12th, 1974. And I haven't had any illicit mind-affecting chemicals, although the truth was I didn't have anything. I smoked pot 5 times in as many years, and I didn't like it. It was like 0 to 60, and I'm hearing rain on the roof, and it's not raining, and I'm paranoid, which I started that way. And it was just like crap, you know. I mean, and I remember one time I had a date back in the 60s. I did have a date. And my date got up to go to the bathroom, and one of my high school classmates held his hand out with a couple of hits of acid in it, and he says, "Come on, man, take it. She'll never know." Yeah, but I'll know. And man, I was already on a bad trip. There was no way I was putting that into my system. So I'll just be safe. I'll drink. And you know, you can't be an alcoholic on beer, right? You got to have wild turkey and you know, I just went down fine behind beer. Thank you very much. I started on beer, and then I would drink whatever was available. And I drank my whole life. We need to qualify from this podium or in a meeting so that someone is satisfied that the person that they're listening to is alcoholic. Because we're in a life-saving business. And it takes one to know one really applies here. But I will promise you, I did not come to tell you war stories about my drinking. I came to talk to you about the disease of alcoholism. This is a very real disease, and it does not live in a bottle. Now, if it lived in a bottle, everybody who drank sooner or later would be in my shoes or yours. But I say that I'm addicted to a non-addictive substance. And I know that and you don't have to agree with that, incidentally. You don't have to agree with anything I say. But how can I say that? Well, 9 out of 10 people, and these statistics are mother-in-law statistics. These are, you know, this isn't hard science here, but our common wisdom is that 9 out of 10 people can drink alcohol with more or less impunity. But 1 out of 10 people is going to get locked in behind that sauce so hard that shy of a miracle, they're going to die there. And that's what I have. I could get onto the floor, I couldn't get up. I could get into the bar, I couldn't get out. I could say I'm not going to drink today, and I would drink today. I would say I'm not going to have another one, and I would have another one. And nothing was more important to me than my alcohol. Now I'm going to tell you that if I had the freedom to have used it, I would have used it to control my alcoholism. Does that make sense to anybody? Because I was being eaten alive from the inside by who I was, and I couldn't stop it. I had my higher self that really wanted to be a good guy. Now I'll tell you, I heard a guy say from the podium, or in a meeting one time, he said, well, hell, he said, I didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous to be a Boy Scout. Well, I did. I can remember, I had this wonderful place. It cost $75 a month. Had pink flamingos on the shower curtain. It was 1 room and a kitchen and a bathroom, and I can remember sitting in that place. And incidentally, that's where I met my wife. Well, not in the, whatever. That's where I was living when I met my wife. But I can remember sitting and looking out my window and thinking at the end of my, I guess it was 3 years before my drinking stopped. I was looking out the window and I said to myself, God, I have become everything I hate. Just everything I hate. I couldn't stop it. Now, powerlessness is a very important concept in here. It's not for lack of effort that my life failed. It's because of my efforts that my life failed. I gave it the old college try, I promise you. And incidentally, before I forget it, and there's many things I forget, so forget the sequential thing. We're going. Oh, I almost forgot it. All right. I can remember being in AA for the first 6 months, and I had something that was lethal, so close to me, I couldn't believe it. It was a thought, and let me tell you, it surfaced after 6 months. It was a thought. It was like a loaded gun at my head, and the thought was, this time it'll be different. After all the humiliation and after all the suffering, after all the loss, this time it'll be different. It scared me to death, thank you, and I did something about it, and I actually talked to somebody about it. I don't talk about my youth very much because I was ashamed of it, because it set me up in a way that really hurt, because it separated me from people. I was a prince. I was a prince of a royal family. My father was the head of Air Force intelligence in Europe, and I grew up in Europe. And we had the King of Greece come to dinner with us. My mother almost caused an international incident. She stole Lord Montgomery's famous beret, Montgomery of Alamein. She stole his beret at the party, and they had to have a Navy captain come and tell her, Dutch, you got to give it back. We'll never get this thing healed. And I grew up kissing women's hands and bowing. And that's how I grew up when I was a little boy. And in Europe, they give children, wine cut back with water for the evening meal. And aren't we European? And wasn't I alcoholic? When I got sober, there was a chart called Dr. Jelinek's chart, and it was this horseshoe thing on the wall of our AA club, and it was like that, and the idea was, and incidentally, I want to tell you that there was a movement in AA when I got sober to change the name of our disease to Dr. Jelinek's disease, because they wanted to emphasize the fact that this was a real disease and not induced by alcohol. Anyway, the idea was you start here normal, and then you start drinking and you go down the horseshoe, and then you hit bottom, and if you get help, you come back up the horseshoe. And so I got wet down when I was 4 years old, and I started stealing liquor when I was 4 years old. I liked it, and I would drink what we call the dead soldiers, after my parents' parties, and whatever was left in the glass, I would go drink that, cigarette butts, whatever, here we go. I was a class drinker right from the beginning. And I grew up like that. So I hope that in some sense you have an idea that maybe I'm an alcoholic. I want to tell you what I was like, because that's the mission. What I was like was this. I was kicked out of every school I went to until I got to high school. I was kicked. It's hard to get kicked out of the 2nd grade and the 4th grade and the 5th grade and the 8th grade. And I was kicked out of all those schools. And it was interesting because I found a shoebox with some of my report cards from when I was a little boy, and there were a lot of A's and B's. There was nothing wrong with my mind, but there was something wrong with my spirit. Which brings me to, no one speaks for AA, okay? Let's get that on the table. But it brings me to my fix on the disease of alcoholism. What is the locus of the disease of alcoholism? Where does it live? It says in the book, when the spiritual maladies overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. That's why a spiritual program works on alcoholism, because my soul is sick. And when my soul gets health and power, I can straighten out mentally and physically and participate in life. But my spirit was sick then, and if you flip my report card over, it said Mickey is a discipline problem, and we alcoholics are undisciplined people. And there were a couple of things I wanted from the time I was very, very little. I wanted to be a Catholic priest, and I wanted to be an artist. And both of those, I mean, I would get my towel, a bath towel on, tie it under my chin, and barbecue pits in those days were serious business. I mean, none of this thing on wheels. I mean, these were brick and mortar monuments to barbecuing. And I would go out to the barbecue pit and I'd say Mass when I was a little boy. And that's when I wasn't throwing bricks through the windows of your house. And so I was an altar boy and a vandal, if you get that. And I had the higher Mickey and the lower Mickey. And I was really pissed off. I was really mad. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of violence because here was the royalty that were my parents. And they would entertain, and I mean they entertained and entertained. You got into the Air Force, Polly, when you were 18. I got out of the Air Force when I was 14. And they entertained and entertained, and the ambition in our home was to get that next star, to have that big network. It was all about that stuff. And you know, I don't know if my mom actually played golf, but the golf widower in the house was me. I was neglected from the time I was a little boy. And when the war broke out in my house, I got to AA and I didn't understand why I couldn't fall asleep. I had to make a decision to go to sleep. Because if you fell asleep in my house, I'll give you one night. My father was strangling my mother in the commanding officer's quarters at Lowry. That's where he retired, was the commanding officer at Lowry Air Force Base. He was strangling my mother on her knees, and she's screaming to me to call the APs, the Air Force Police. And I can remember many nights when my brother would come in and he would hold me, my big brother, and he would hold me because my parents were going at it again. I was terrified. And I came from an all-warrior family. I'm not talking about pretend. I'm talking about warriors. My father fought for 4 years in the Pacific. He was a pilot. My oldest brother was a Marine officer in Vietnam. My next oldest brother was a Navy pilot in Vietnam. And then there was me. And my standard for a man is if I can knock you on your ass, I'm a man. And I could never hit anyone. I didn't have it in me to hit anybody for any reason. I tried to fight, and I fought, and I lost. I was just lousy at it. But I didn't have it in me. And the tenor in my family was awful. It was awful. And I loved my parents, but man, it was tough. And I always wonder to God, why did you put me in that family? Because, you know, He's God, and He's perfect. He's perfect. Why did you put me in that family? Because He wanted me to have a model, and this I got about last year or 2 years ago. He wanted me to have a model of what a warrior was, because I was going to fight for you for the rest of my life. And I got to be a spiritual warrior in here. And I'll tell you, the training was really hard. So I got kicked out of all these schools. Why do I bring that up? It says in our big book that our liquor was but a symptom. Well, if our liquor is but a symptom, what's the disease? And so when I'm working with somebody and we go to the second half of the first step, I take them through the bedevilments on page 52. I call it a partial laundry list of unmanageability in our book. We're a prey to misery and depression. We can't make a living. We're filled with fear. You know, I can't remember the rest of them. You can find them on page 52. And when I got sober, if you tried to talk about your feelings in a meeting, you were accused of talking psychobabble, and they didn't want to hear it. And I'll tell you why it was an issue for me. Because I had a loaded .32 automatic pistol in the top drawer of my dresser at home, and I had a plan. And if you ask a newcomer coming in here what their plan is, I'll guarantee you they have one. There is a plan. And my plan is that if this doesn't work, I'm putting my brains on the wall. Because I'd hear people talk about this pink cloud. They got this pink cloud. I didn't know what they were talking about. I would go to an AA meeting and I'd come home, Maria would be in bed, and I'd lay down on the floor in our living room and I would beg God to kill me. I was not enjoying being without alcohol. It was the only medicine I had. And what happened was I stopped drinking and I ran into Mickey. And I couldn't control Mickey any more than those teachers or the police could. And I was really, really unhappy. So I'm going, man, if this thing doesn't work, I'm out of here. Now, Marie, I'll tell you, I did not serve in the military, but this is a good model for me. In an F-4 Phantom attack aircraft, they have the pilot, and the pilot, they write books about the pilot. You know, he's dashing and whatnot, right? And he deserves to have books written about him because, I mean, he's doing a very tough job. But I'll tell you who the hero in an F-4 Phantom is to me, and that's the rear seater, the weapons officer. Why? Because the weapons officer is going where the pilot's going with no vote. The pilot's all dashing, but the Wizzo's back there going, oh my God. And that was my wife. So for 3.5 years, I had a loaded gun in my drawer, and it makes one of those stories that's sort of macho or whatnot. I mean, it was insane. But she had to go to work every day, or she had to take care of our family, and she had to know every day that could be the day that I'd pull that trigger. And I told Marie, I said, I'm not going to say there's a miracle in my life if there isn't one. Now, of course, de facto, there's a miracle because I'm dry, right? But I was super, super ready to commit suicide. And incidentally, a person who wants to commit suicide is not a model of flexibility. So I was locked on that wavelength, and here we went into sobriety. And I got sober, and I thought, what's that feeling? What's that feeling? And the feeling was artificiality. That was the most artificial sensation I'd ever had in my entire life, and it was being without alcohol. It was like, truly, I was a stranger in a strange land. I was like, there's a blues lyric that says, I've been down so long it looks like up. But that's one of the most profound things I ever heard, because, man, I had twisted and distorted myself into that is normal. Now I was presented with some semblance of normal, and it felt like I was twisted and constrained, like I was down. Up looked like down. And I thought, well, pretty soon now, I'll feel normal. It's going to feel normal. It never did. It never did. Now it feels like normal. But I can't tell you the day it happened. Man, it was abnormal, and I was like, oh crap, here we are. How do I live? And I'm filled with fear, and I'm prey to misery and depression. I can't control my emotional nature. Hell, I had that for the first 2 days of this conference. I was just not doing well. And finally, I was able to 10th step with Marie and with Jack. I went to Mass last night. I got a chance to God had mercy on me because he knew I had to get up here and say something this morning. So we started down this road, and it was like, now, I could actually give an Al-Anon talk, not because I have the experience of going to Al-Anon and having what you have in Al-Anon. I'm sure I have some of it. But I could give an Al-Anon talk because I'm so grateful for Al-Anon. Because here's what happened. Judy, you said it takes two people to argue. And incidentally, what a lovely person you are. I'm so glad you're here. I'm sorry to just hit you with that like that. I normally warn person before I give them, but anyway. Takes two people to fight. And so what would happen is I'd go to work and I was not doing well. I was so angry, sober, at work. No one wanted to be around me. They did not want to work with me. They did not want to be around me. And so I walked to work and back, and I would get a case of the means coming home. You know, it's just, my God, somebody's got to pay for this. And it was Marie. So I would come back in the house, and I'd sit down, and I'd just start to wind that fight up. And I'd look in her eyes, and I'd say, "Don't you detach, damn it." Too late, she was gone. She was sitting with her higher power, and there was no fighting the muss at home that night. Thank God she saved, and God saved our marriage. She saved our marriage because I'm out of control. There's no way I'm controlling that. Well, I mean, listen, he's not drinking. He ought to be able to control this whole mess, right? Man, I'm telling you, it's a real disease. It's a real disease. It's a real disease. So I got into a group of people that were extraordinarily mean in AA. I mean, brutal. Did I say brutal? Okay. And I learned precision from them, but it was horrible. I hated the experience. I just hated it. So what I did is I looked around and I picked like this guy I thought I could steamroll. He was this little guy with a burr haircut, and I'm going like, I can roll over this sucker. And you see, God is a kind God. And I was so guilty. I had survivor's guilt for not fighting in Vietnam. My generation went to war, and I had bad pins. I got bad knees. And the Army did the surgery. There was no question about what kind of a mess my legs were in. And I could not get into the military. And I had all this survivor's guilt. And so God gave me in George, this little guy with the burr haircut, he gave me a man who had just come back from 3 tours in Vietnam as a medic attached to the Marines out in the bush. Whew. And I got to work through it with George. Now you have to understand, either you're willing to go at any length to get sober or you're not. Not only was George one of the toughest individuals I ever met, but George was about as gay as Chiquita Banana. And I loved this man. You have to understand. I walked 2 years. He went through the valley of death with me for 2.5 years. But he was gay, and I was really uncomfortable, and I was scared, and I didn't know what the hell, you know. I didn't know. I didn't have a rule book. But George was just one of the best things that ever happened in my whole life. And now George was now studying to be a Methodist minister because he'd had all the war he wanted to ever have in his life. And George had lost 100 pounds in Weight Watchers. So I would go over to take counsel at George's apartment, and George would give me Weight Watchers ice cream and cookies. And I was 145 pounds, 6'3". I truly looked like an antenna. And he's giving me Weight Watchers ice cream and cookies, and he says, "It's okay, Mickey, it has vitamins in it." So I'd eat my Weight Watchers ice cream and cookies, and I would, you know, George would say things to me like, "Mickey, it's always darkest before the dawn." And I would call George up and I'd say, "George, is it almost dawn?" Whew. Yeah, he never let me go. He never let me go. So I went over to see George. I want to tell you my cheese sandwich story. I went over to see George, and I want to tell you I had a real problem with the God thing in Alcoholics Anonymous, really severely. I'll tell you how I handled it. I'd had a sponsor in this group before George, and he was a defrocked Catholic priest. He had committed vehicular homicide in a blackout, and he was kind enough to try to help me. I told him, I said, "You know, I got it finally. This whole thing's about God. This whole program is about God. Your understanding of God, but it's still about God." And I thought, man, I'm thinking to myself, what are they going to do? Are they going to cure me with fairy tales? What the hell is this? I'm dying. And so I can't be alcoholic, right? Because if you're alcoholic, you have to do all this. So I'm not alcoholic. So I told John, I said, can we have lunch? He says, sure, let's have lunch. I thought it was going to be me and John. It was the whole group sitting at this table. Every thug, including the chief thug, and they were all there. And I sit down and I tell him, I said, listen, I found out I'm not alcoholic. Right? And the head thug looks at me and he says, really? And I said, yep. And he says, well, come on over. There's a bar on the other side of this place. I'll buy you a drink. I said, what? He says, yeah, come on over. I'll buy you a drink. And it was like my butt was riveted to the chair. I said, I can't do that. He said, why? I said, if I go over there and have a drink, my life will go to hell right now. And he says, and you're not alcoholic. And I've used that. I've used that many, many times in my sponsorship. We had to concede, fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic to get on down the road. And I thought, well, I've got no choice. They're not offering me anything else. They're not offering me plan B. We'll do one without God and it's going to be okay. And but I struggled with it. And I would like to share with you how I took my first 3 steps. I was sitting on the steps of 1311 York Street, which is where I got sober in Denver. We called it the Mother House. Anyway, and I'm with a guy named Bob O, and we're sitting on the front steps, and we're 12th stepping this guy, and I mean, it gave me goosebumps. I was so good. I was about 6 months sober. I mean, I had the tai chi. It was all good, and he left, and Bob and I discussed the relative merits of suicide. That's how well we were doing. And a guy came along, and I talked with him, and he said, look, I live right next door. Come on over and let's talk. I told him I wasn't doing well. Here's my first 3 steps. He asked me about my drinking, and I told him about my drinking, and did I have any power over alcohol? And I said, no. Did I have the power by myself to stay away from it? And I said, no. He said, how's your life going? How are you managing in your marriage? How are you doing with money? You got any friends? And it went on like that, and of course, I was just not doing well at all. And he says, okay, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And he said, Mickey, do you believe in God? And I said, no. This is a program of rigorous honesty. They told me I had to tell the truth. And I said, no, I don't. And he knew his book. And he said, well, he said, are you willing to believe that there's a power greater than yourself that could restore you to sanity? And I said, no. Because we're in the fairy tale zone. You know what I mean? And he looks at me again and he said, Mickey, he said, are you willing to pretend that there may be a power greater than you? I said, yes. He said, that's step 2. Let's move on. That was it. That was my second step, and that's where I started. So I went over to see George one day, and here's what it was. I was telling him about my life. And I was cheating on my wife. I was so angry no one would work with me. I was about to get fired sober. I was suicidal. I was antisocial and, whatever. And George had heard this before. So he and I had my brown bag and my cheese sandwich, and I'm eating and I'm talking to George, and he stood up and he said, Mickey, he says, when I got where you are, he says, I got down on my knees and I asked God from the bottom of my heart for help. And he says, and he picked up his coat and he says, and you can use my apartment, and he left. Now, George said he got down on his knees, and so I got down on my knees, and I got down on my knees, and I had no higher power. So the only prayer I could come up with was, will somebody please help me? And I got up and I wrote a little note to George, and I said, George, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think God wants me to die today. And I went on back to work, and I called him a couple hours later, and I said, George, I have one question for you. And he said, what's that? And I said, do I think the way I think and do the things I do because I'm alcoholic? And he said, yes. And I said, can I recover from the way I live? And he said, yes. And I've been paying dues behind this thing my whole life. And I did not know what was wrong with me. I did not know what was wrong with me. I wanted to be a good guy. I couldn't be a good guy. Or if I was a good guy, I was the best guy, you know, whatever. It was just... And there's a line in the chapter, The Family Afterwards, and it says, Father with his, like a gaunt prospector with his belt drawn in over his last ounce of food, his pick strikes gold. And my pick struck gold right there. And I said, oh my God, this is a disease and we can recover from it. Because I'm telling you, there is a competition in Alcoholics Anonymous. Invariably, you've spilt more on your tie than I ever drank, or you were the worst drinker, and like my drinking doesn't compare, or whatever the hell it is. And we go like that, and you're talking about my drinking, and I got a loaded gun in my drawer. If dry would fix it, I'd be home, but dry doesn't fix it. Who's going to address my disease? If you're going to dry me out, you better help me out. Because here it comes. Here it comes. So I grabbed everybody I could get my hands on, and I told them this is a disease. Like they all knew it. And it was like, and we can recover from it. And my friend Molly was coming out of York Street and going down the steps to go to work, get a bus on Colfax. And I walked down the steps with her, and I walked down to Colfax with her, and I got on the bus with her. Make sure she didn't miss the fact that this is a disease and we can recover from it. Best news I ever got in my life. And don't cut me off from psychobabble. Are you kidding me? Like F your feelings. That was the phrase I got forever and ever and ever. And it turns out they may be tricky, my feelings, but they are a barometer that is God-given that will tell me, danger, Will Robinson, something's wrong, pay attention, you know what I mean. And so I started to go to work on this program. And Marie and I, they told us, and Marie's been in Al-Anon as long as I've been. I have a few days longer in AA, I'm just saying. They told us, you guys are to live like railroad tracks, not on top of each other, but side by side. And the way that you can have a marriage is, Mickey, you like a prize fighting ring. Mickey, you go into your corner. Marie, you go into your corner. You work your programs, put God in the middle, and you will get a marriage. And we got married on New Year's Eve, so I couldn't forget our anniversary. Not for the tax break that your father thought. And I have to tell you, this is about timing. You know, sometimes timing in life is everything. I asked Marie to marry me the night before she found out she was pregnant. There's never been any question. And when she told me that she was pregnant, I thought my buttons were going to pop off my shirt. I was so happy and so proud. We were not married. And I'm in the $75 a month room. And we went and we had a meatball sandwich lunch, and we told everybody in the restaurant that we were going to have a baby. And we didn't know what the baby's sex was going to be, but it was a girl, and we named her Amy after the French ami, which is friend. The richness, the richness of this weekend, think about it. All these wonderful people have come to share. How could you get a meeting like this in Greeley or in Denver or in Gillette, Wyoming? How can you get these marvelous people with all these years of experience to get together in one place to come and share all these wonderful stories? How is it that I could be that proud and happy to have a child when I didn't want children? I wanted a wife. I really wanted to be married more than anything. Matter of fact, marriage is my number one priority, and it always has been. I've always wanted my marriage more than I've wanted anything else, career or whatever. I'm not saying I did a great job with it. I'm telling you that was my priority. And And Marie said to me one time, I hope you don't mind terribly, she said, can we move in together? And I said, no, ma'am, we can get married, but I will not live with you. Because I wanted God's blessing. And I went to my priest and I said, Father, and he was one of my high school instructors, I said, Father, I want to get married, and my wife is not Catholic, which is an understatement, I got to tell you. Marie was raised in a flag-waving, drum-beating atheist home. I mean, stone atheist. They were listening to Madeline Murray records, they had it going on there. And I said, Father, she's not Catholic, and she's pregnant, and I want to get married. And he said, well, Mickey, he said, you could marry her maybe just like in a civil ceremony, and if things don't. I said, Father, I want a nuptial high mass. If I'm going to marry this lady, I need God's help. And we got married in that church, and we started out. We got married at 6 o'clock in the evening at Mother of God Church on Spear and Logan in Denver, very tiny church. We got married at 6 in the evening, and I went to work at 9. I was a singer. I was a folk singer. And that's, it's a real good way to starve. Not much has changed in our lives, has it? I made $75 that first month as a folk singer. But anyway, we went and sang, and the weeks before we had our wedding, I invited everybody in the bar, come on over, it's going to be New Year's Eve, and join us. I'm getting married, we're getting married, and I have stand Marie up and introduce her, and so proud of her. And so what we had for our wedding reception is we had the general public and our parents and brothers and sisters and friends all mixed in together wearing hats and blowing things. It was a hell of a great party. All right. So we started down this road, and I thought that the best thing that could happen in my life was that I would be a second-class citizen because I'm alcoholic. I was ashamed of being alcoholic. It was a weakness. I came from an all-warrior family. What are you talking about? Belly up to the bar, Machine Gun Mike, Sergeant Rock, here we go. Not so much. And we started down this road. And the idea was you could surrender to win. If you admitted defeat, this power could flow in. And I was going to be a second-class citizen, and I was going to be a janitor. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a janitor. But when you've got a college degree, by the grace of God, it might be that God wants you to use it. And I thought I had this picture that I was going to live in the basement of my own house. I was really not doing well. And self-esteem, Don arranged for me to speak at some pig roast or something over in Grand Junction in the early days. And he called me on the day that I was to be in Grand Junction speaking, and I answered the phone, and he said, Mickey, what's going on? You're supposed to be in Grand Junction talking. And I said, they can get anybody. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. That self-esteem stuff has really, really been hard in here to pick my chin up. Well, if you hang around Don Pritz, things happen. And so he would get so many invitations to speak that he spilled them off to other people. And so I went out on the circuit when I was 1 year sober, and I've been on the circuit for 35 years. And my first gig was in a deal in Ulysses, Kansas. I was going into the big time, baby. And Marie and I and Bob O started out of Denver in a C-47, a DC-3. We flew at 5,000 feet, going over to this meeting, and we start to go down to land, and then he pulls it back up, and the captain gets on the horn, and he says, folks, I don't know how to tell you this, he says, but I can't see the runway. And I'm going, okay, really? And he says, I'm going to circle around and we'll give it one more shot. And he says, if I can't see that runway, we'll fly you over to Amarillo, we'll put you on a bus and bring you back into town. And so that's what he did. And there had been an ice storm in the area, and they put us on a bus, and we were the last vehicle into Ulysses, Kansas, and they gave us candles at the desk, and this is my first time on the circuit. This is going to be something, right? And on the way Bob said, there's somebody I want you to meet. And I said, who's that? And he says, it's Bill O'Neill. And I said, well, how will I know him? He says, oh, it's easy. He's missing one of everything. So I go in. That's Arbutus' husband, for those who might not know. But anyway, if you didn't know who Arbutus was either. But anyway, Arbutus, I love Arbutus, and she just recently passed away. But anyway, he said, I want him to tell you a story, and I want to share it with you. And I mean, this is some talk. Here we go. Anyway, so he says, I want him to tell you his life after life story. And I said, okay. Now, mind you, here's a guy who's having trouble with God. So this is going to have so many familiar things to you, but just listen all the way through, please. I said, Bill, they told me that I found him. And he had one arm and one eye, and I knew it must be the guy. I said, they told me to ask you to tell me their life after life story. And he said, okay. He says, I don't normally tell it anymore, but I'll tell it to you. He said, I flatlined in the emergency room, and I had a heart attack, and my spirit came up above my body, and I could watch them all working on me. And he says, I started walking down this tunnel toward this brilliant, beautiful light. And he said, I got halfway down the tunnel, and he said, I got tired. And he said, so I sat down, and some people came to help me. And he said, and I recognized them. They were AAs who had died, and they came and got me, and they walked me to the light. And he said, I got to the light, and I fell in love with this light. There was so much love and warmth coming from this light. And he said, but the voice came out of the thing and says, you're not done. You and Arbutus have your tape library, and you're not finished with it yet. You have to go back. He said, so I started walking back down the tunnel. And he said, I got halfway there, and I got tired. And I sat down. And he said, some people came to help me. And he said, I recognized them. And he said, they were AAs who had not died yet. And they came and got me, and they brought me to the mouth of the tunnel. And when I got there, all the meters jumped, and I was back, and I'm back doing my job, and he was there taping. The stories, who are we? You know, the stories. Jack, how much time do I have 5. Oh, crap. Did I get sober? Okay. I have to tell you, this is really, really important. It's like we think I thought that what we have in this program is survival from a terminal illness. What we have is the keys of the kingdom, okay? But we're going to do it God's way this time. And I told you I wanted to be a priest. I obviously did not make it to the priesthood, but our baby is a Catholic priest. He is our baby. And we call him a baby priest, but really he's 4 years a priest now, so he's big time, you know. And he's one of the Catholic chaplains for the University of Colorado in Boulder. And our daughter is, you know, there's a book, I think it was called Sarah Straight and Tall or something like that. And our daughter is Sarah Straight and Tall. Her name is Amy, and she is beautiful, and she's lovely all the way through. She is sober 10 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. She's married to a man. Well, I wish I had more time, but we'll spare your rear end because I know it's hard. What happened is I had this whole gaggle of young men, all young single men at one period of time, and we would talk about dating, and we talk about women, and we talk about the care and feeding of women, and what it means to date, and why are you there, and all this stuff. And invariably I would ask them, I wonder where the woman God has for you, where is she tonight, and what she's doing? Who is she? Little did I know for this guy, she was upstairs. And so he married my daughter, but I heard his 5th step first. I didn't know it at that time. I'm telling you, it was all legal. I did not know. And they are the parents of 6 children. And he is sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she is sober. And our middle son lives in Buffalo, and they live in Springfield, Illinois. And our middle son lives in Buffalo, New York. And he's a real man. He's gentle. He's a very gentle man. And he married a woman. Going in, he knew that she had multiple personality disorder. He knew it. and he married her. We had one prayer for Neil, and our prayer was, God, please give Neil somebody who just loves him something terrible. And that's what he got. She loves him something terrible. And they have 2 daughters. And she is mostly, I can't think of the word, but unified. Do you know what I'm saying? Integrated. Thank you. She's mostly integrated, and they have a wonderful life. And our baby, Peter, he's not our baby, he's a big, wonderful guy, is a wonderful priest, and he uses the 12 steps in counseling. People who come to him, and if you go to confession to him and you've got something going on in your family, he'll tell you to go to Al-Anon, tell you to go to AA. He will encourage you and support you in that. That's the kind of priest he is. Our children love us, and we love our children. And Marie and I love each other. I am more in love with Marie now than I was when I met her, and I got flipped right upside down. It was love at first sight. We were at our first professional gig, and she was finishing up at Denver University, and she was the hostess at the place across the hall, a very fancy restaurant. And she was our first audience, and she introduced herself, and she was kind of loaded, and I was sober. That never happened again. And she introduced herself, and I thought she said her name was Murray. And I thought, oh my God, a woman named Murray, how intriguing. You know? And I said inside myself, I will never let her go. I fell in love with her that night. I said, I will never let her go. And 3 months later, we were married. And it took us 20 years to have a full marriage in our house, with all the principles invoked and a gracious God. And it turns out, and I want to tell you this, there is no substitute for truth. And there's no substitute for integrity. There just isn't. And we needed to talk about some things in our marriage, and we did. And we had a 5-year honeymoon after we had that conversation. Marie is my guide and my teacher. I am never in doubt for what's going on in the world. I'll say, Marie, and she just tells me. And she's my scout when we go into one of those buffet things. You know, she's my food taster. Don't eat this when it's low. I tell people, if I'm going out, I'm not going out on Mother Murphy's rum balls. You know what I mean? And I lost my job. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Whatever it is, that's right. We just put it in God's hands. I'm going to steal the time. I'm just going to steal a few minutes. So we think that the newcomer is the most endangered person in our program, and let's all get around the newcomer. Let's all take care of the newcomer. And at 23 years sober, I laid down to take my life with a knife. I had lost everything. At one point, we had the house on the hill. I had an 8-bedroom home with a swimming pool, we did. And we had a 3-story Victorian mansion, and we had all the goodies, and I had an antique car collection going, and we lost all of it. And one day these AAs came over, and they helped by weeding our gardens and painting our walls and pulling up our carpet, helping us get all of our stuff in a truck. And basically we were homeless at 23 years sober. And I would have told you I was not connected and attached to the money, and I was, and I laid down to take my life one night. Marie didn't know where I was. And I thought, I'm going to open my veins now. No, I'll do it in 5 minutes. And I went through 4 hours of that. And I went to hell for 4 hours. And I came up, and it was a very, very bad time. And during that time, I only had 2 prayers. I would say, God, I can't breathe. I just can't breathe. And the other prayer was, will you please give me a cookie? I just wanted one thing that was sweet. You know what I mean? Just something that was sweet in my day and my life. And we just went on like that. Anyway, I could not kill myself. And the next morning I woke up and I called a lady in Minnesota she had told me about this guy in St. Paul who really had a wonderful program. And I was trying to get in touch with this guy, Bob. And I talked with her, and she had her big book in her lap, and she's reading me stuff, and she's saying all these wonderful things to me. And I got it. And I said, forget him. Would you be my sponsor? I was 23 years sober. She was 16 years sober. And her name was Cookie. He gave me a cookie, all right. And she walked with me for the next 4 years. And she pulled me back up into a program. Then the last thing, I could not be a priest, but I tell you what, because we lost so much, I was in advertising for 25 years, and then I became Dead Man Walking. It's a young man's game, and I started painting apartments. Marie would take the car to go out to one temp job, and I get on my bicycle, and Jack S., who was our 10th step guy yesterday, was kind enough to give me a job. And I was sponsoring Jack at the time, and my sponsee gave me a job, and I was painting apartments for $7 an hour with him. And we started back, and I did temp work, and I did temp work, and I didn't think I could be an employee. And I did temp work, and I worked my way up eventually to $11.50 an hour. And, okay, this is the last thing, I promise. I wanted to be an artist all my life, and through a story I can't tell you because of time, I became an artist, and what I do is I make custom cowboy boots. And I never had any patience, and I work with my hands now, and I make custom cowboy boots, and I paint Russian icons. I paint religious pictures in gold and in egg tempera. And people buy these things. They buy my boots, and they buy my pictures, and 6 days a week I'm a working artist, and Marie's at home with me. She works with me, so we live together and we work together. My family never got completely healed. My mom and dad died, but I was solid with them. I was with them up until they died. And we had a ribbon tied around it. My brothers and I don't get along. And it's a sad story, but you are my brothers and sisters, and you are my family. And I love you so much.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, power it on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.